The other thing that we're seeing over the past week is the Army is now offering, I think, $65,000 or up to $65,000 for people to pay their student loans if you sign up. And I think apparently there's an extra bonus, I think like an $8,000 bonus if you can ship in 5 days. I mean, even the way it sounds is wild.
Yeah.
The Air Force offering $50,000 to people as a signing bonus, up to $50,000 as a signing bonus. I mean, it certainly makes sense to me why they might need to offer money to get people to fight. But I mean, it just feels so perverse, Mike, that they're using this moment to really prey on people's biggest challenges to, throw them into the maw of the war machine.
Sure. Well, their studies show, and there's surveys done on this all the time. Most people who join the military, it's a college education thing. It's to get money for college. It's not for a career. It's not to be part of the American military for their whole life. It's a means to an end. It's I'll do this short stint in the military. I'll get my college paid for. What's interesting about what you mentioned, the student debt repayment initiative that the military is doing, is that that's kind of a shift. It used to be you join the military first to get money to go to college to begin with. But the emergence of this student debt crisis over the past decade or so, now it's like people who go to college, and it's targeting people primarily who don't graduate from college, because this isn't like an officer program where, oh, you have your degree, join and become an officer. It's for people who dropped out of college and have a lot of debt. And they say that specifically in their thing. It's people, like with the general who came up with the program said, people start college and then plans change. And it's like, well, for working class people, it's not just plans change is why you drop out of college. It's inability to afford it, family obligations, life getting in the way, as it were. So they're targeting people who had to drop out of college, don't have a degree, nothing to show for the money they spent, and they have a lot of debt. But here's where it gets a little wild. So there's only they tout this thing, and really a lot of this is just geared towards getting people in the front door of the recruiting office, saying we'll pay $65,000 of student debt if you join the military, if you join the Army right now. That's not the case. There's different levels of it, but to get the student debt forgiveness, it's only in particular jobs. And right now, there are only 4 jobs in the Army that they are offering the student loan debt repayment for. Let's talk about some of these jobs. Okay, so one of the 4 jobs, one of them is shower and laundry specialist, responsible for overseeing care of personal laundry and shower operations. So joining the military on a 4 to 8 year contract to do laundry in a giant laundry room of just like shit.
Wow.
So that's one of the jobs. And that's like one of the hardest jobs the Army has to recruit for. So all of these jobs that nobody wants is what they throw these big initiatives at. So it makes it look a little less appealing. Another one of these jobs, transportation management coordinator, which is a truck driver pretty much. Those are most of the people that got killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Just people on pointless supply chain operations, just driving around in trucks, waiting to get blown up. But the best one on this list, this is how you get your $60,000 student debt repaid, is to sign up for 48 years doing mortuary affairs specialists. And so that is dealing with all the bodies of civilians and soldiers who are killed on the battlefield. So that's a pretty hefty price to pay to get your student loan debt repaid, is to just manage the body parts and putting them together and putting them in the little box that they put on the plane and so forth. So it's kind of rough. And I think it's not a coincidence that the Army is unveiling this plan now after hopes of student loan debt being forgiven is out the window. I mean, I was extremely hopeful that, okay, maybe Bernie would win and he definitely would cancel all student debt. And so I think there was a lot of people that were holding out saying, I got this debt. We have these deferments because of COVID, so I don't have to pay it right now. And maybe there's momentum building for this just being forgiven, where I don't have to worry about it anymore. Biden even promised to forgive a certain amount of it. And then now they're pretty open in saying, we're not even touching this campaign promise of this kind of minimum guarantee of $10,000 in student loan debt repayment. So now that the optimism and the hope has been completely dashed by the White House, now the Army is coming out and saying, you know what, we'll take care of some of that student loan debt for you if you don't mind picking up body parts and trying to match them to the person who is blown apart. And honestly, the same is true for the Air Force offering this big, cash initiative for people to join the Air Force. I mean, first of all, the only way you get over $10,000 in this cash bonus is if you join for 6 years or more. So that's a pretty big obligation. People don't realize that these bonuses are spread out month by month over the term of your entire contract.
Mm.
So $10,000, even $50,000 isn't that much when you think about it broken up over 12 months a year for 6 years or longer. That's, you're getting a little extra in your paycheck. And again, these Air Force jobs are only offering them for like 2 or 3 Air Force jobs. And they're things like unexploded ordnance disposal. So you go and try to diffuse the IED and hope you don't get blown up when you're diffusing it. So it's for the most high risk jobs that a lot of people don't want because they're, smart enough to not want them. So it's obviously it's preying on people, but it's not just offering, okay, we'll pay your college student loan debt if you come into the Army, do 4 years in the Army. It's you have to pay a hefty price to get these benefits.
Mm.
I guess if you want free healthcare, you also have to. I mean, it's amazing. It's like the only socialized institution or only institution that practices any level of socialism in the United States is the military. If you want free healthcare, if you want subsidies for college, if you want subsidies for a mortgage, like you do get all of these benefits. You just have to also maybe die.
That's true. And, it's important to remember that that wasn't always the case in the United States. I mean, when there was a strong labor movement, there were guarantees for housing assistance and healthcare and education assistance and training and all the things that drop people into the military now. That did exist for a lot of jobs in the United States, for a certain demographic of people in particular. And the more that that's been eroded, right, the military has been pretty much the only place remaining that has maintained these types of benefits. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a draw, and it's a combination of things that recruiters rely on. I mean, of course they rely on economic distress. In fact, the number one school that's targeted by recruiters are the tier 1 schools, the one that have the highest percentage of low income students. And so there's this obviously preying on anxieties about jobs and college and so forth. But the other thing that they prey on is just youthful ignorance. I mean, these programs start targeting kids like under 12 years old. I mean, I think the young Marines you can join when you're like 7 or 8 or something like that. In fact, the American Civil Liberties Union called Army recruiting practices so extreme that they, quote, undermine the voluntary nature of enlistment. I mean, and this student loan debt forgiveness thing and these cash initiatives, they're coming also not just on their own, but with this other huge rollout that we saw, I think early last year, was this investment in Army esports and having recruiters literally just putting on a headset, playing Call of Duty all day, and then randomly talking to young teenagers who are playing Call of Duty and being like, hey, do you want to do this for real? Like, I'm a recruiter, you can, whatever. And which is like straight up just like sneaking into your living room. Your parents just think you're playing video games, and actually you're talking to a recruiter when you're on Twitch or something like that, or just on Xbox or whatever. So it's really nefarious. And, they have to employ these kind of things because just if they don't, not a lot of people join. And I think it's, the recruitment numbers show that at times of greater economic distress, there's more people joining. But even then, the military really does have to try hard to lure people in.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, the Marines had a club, and the theme of it was that they would help you figure out your life and what you're going to do after graduation. And amazingly, despite all the jobs that exist, they always said one of the steps was to join the Marine Corps. But, they would help you with your homework and all this other stuff that people need. Well, let me ask you this, Mike, because you've been through this process. There are obviously so many millions of kids who are just trying to figure it all out. I mean, what's your message to young people who are getting all these messages from the video games, from the recruiters, maybe even from people around them, that this is a good deal, that they should join the military in order to improve their lives?
I think one of the best pieces of data that can illustrate this is I think a lot of people are aware of the suicide epidemic in the military. One suicide a day in active duty military was a statistic for a long period of time. And I think there's an assumption, and I think it is the common assumption is this is a result of post-traumatic stress from the deployments to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that people they go through really horrific experiences, and then that leads to their ultimate suicide. Most of the people who commit suicide in the military have not deployed at all. And so that shows that a lot of people who come into the military thinking that it's an escape, that you can make your life actually better by getting out, they end up in the military and they see that their life has gotten quite a bit worse and more difficult. You're away from your friends, you're away from your family, you're in a kind of highly restrictive situation. It's not everything a recruiter promised. In fact, the number one thing you hear in basic training is my recruiter lied to me. I mean, it's just kind of the mantra that young recruits have. And so just knowing this great deal of hardship that active duty people experience. I mean, clearly it's if you think it's a way that's going to make your life better, talking to people in the military would obviously tell you a very different story. And that measures up to not only statistics, but most people get the hell out of the military as soon as they can, even if they join thinking that it was going to be a career thing. Something like over 70% of people get out as soon as their contract are up. And that doesn't even count the people that find ways to get out before. So if it was so great, like all these recruiters promise, everyone's pretty anxious to get out at the first moment they can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to note there was what you're talking about reminds me of even the New York Times recently had this piece that got rightfully mocked in the last few days, but it was that drone crews have killed more people than nearly anyone else in the military in the past decade, but they seldom got the same recovery periods or mental health screenings as other fighters, the unseen scars of those who kill via remote control. I'm not joking. That's literally what the New York Times said, but that does speak to something of what you're talking about, is even those that don't get deployed, the military is a pretty miserable experience.
Yeah, for
even
sure.
for
And
the
there,
remote control killers.
yeah. And there's definitely been drone operators who have become conscientious objectors or
Right.
become part of the resistance and quit their jobs. Daniel Hale, in prison for leaking information about the drone program. But yeah, I mean, this was like, it just goes like they target people for this job because it's like, oh, you can do this cool video game type style killing. And then, it's just all cool. And it's like you're this, high technology secret agent type person or whatever. But yeah, I mean, they don't take care of anyone in the military that well, let alone people that they deem as like not deserving of it as much. But yeah, I mean, it's I think it just speaks to just how weird and gross the military of the U.S. empire has become, that there's even an issue of you have this high number of people that are just killing people with computers all day who are like left behind. And it's like the crazy part about that story to me is not that they're not giving people the right treatment or whatever. It's the fact that we have all these people in a room blowing people up all day, something that's been shown to have like a over 90% civilian casualty rate or something like that. And that's kind of accepted as just like the norm. But then it's a story all of a sudden when it's like, oh, these people are traumatized and they need adequate mental health care. It's like, well, why is this kind of an acceptable reality to begin with, that there are these rooms all over the country filled with people that are pushing these buttons and killing people?
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, before we let you go, I mean, you guys are doing a ton of great stuff at the Empire Files. For those who are out here watching who aren't already following you, I don't know what you're doing, or can they follow you for all of the fantastic stuff you have coming up?
Yeah, well, you can find Empire Files on YouTube, social media, podcast also. So just look for Empire Files anywhere and you'll find it everywhere in different forms.
Yeah, great merch too, but couldn't recommend it more highly. Mike, thanks so much for joining us. I know you got a lot going on. Appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
No, happy to.